Okay, welcome everybody to today's session of Collegium Coranicum. The name of the surah is the title. Will be an English session, but it's possible since there are some participants from Turkey and also our guest Enes F is here from Ankara University, that in the discussion we have the two languages involved. Of course, we offer, or Enes is so kind to take care of translation in the discussion if needed. Today's session is about a neglected topic. We are still not sure what kind of topic and what kind of relevance the names of surah have. They are mentioned in traditional literature. They are to be seen in manuscripts. So it will be about the two perspectives from empirical evidence, manuscripts on parchment, but also surah as literary units mentioned in scholarly literature. Unfortunately, Dirk Hartwig, for unforeseen obligations, could not make it today. He wanted to present briefly about Surah 17. In our talks today, we use the numerical names in order to avoid those names we are going to discuss. I have to open the presentation. Please. So today's topic is the name of the surah. Surah names are reported in the traditional literature. A very known report is Fihrest of Ibn Nadīm, a text of the late 10th century, where Ibn Nadīm reports about Mus'haf of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, and he is giving the different order of chapters of surahs in this Mus'hafs. In the edition of Fuad Asayed, which you see on the screen, marked yellow in brackets, in square brackets, are the surah names as we know them today, inserted to guide us and to help to understand which surah names are mentioned. For instance, when it says Alef Lam Mim Sad, the square brackets tell us that in the Egyptian print it is Al-A'raf, that Banū Isrāījl, a line below, is al-Isrāʿ, and so on. So we see here in the edition of that passage of Ibn Nadīm's Fihrest, we have surah names different from the ones we are used to. Banū Isrāījl was a topic that Dirk Hartwig today wanted to present. We will postpone this to a later date. The name of the Surah 17 is given as Banū Isrāījl, in square brackets al-Isrāʿ. In the Kairiner print, the name of the surah is al-Isrāʿ. But if we have a look into the Quran print of India, Pakistan, and South Asia, the print of the Taj Company Limited, we see that the label Banū Isrāījl for a surah name is still living today. We are perhaps a bit blinded by the so-called standard of the Egyptian edition, which, as Arnold Schmidt says, convinced us cannot be labeled the standard. East of Iran, the Cairo print and the Medina Mus'haf is much less used than we believe. Surah names have been very little studied. There is a reference study by Lamiya Kandil from 1992 in German, in Der Islam, die Surennamen in der offiziellen Kairiner Koranausgabe und ihre Varianten. It presents surah names given in the Egyptian prints and other surah names from the tradition, from traditional scholars that Lamiya Kandil had gone through. You see in the article several lists. The first list, it starts with Surah al-Fatiha, Fatihat al-Kitab. Al-Kitab has a cross. It means it's something that Lamiya Kandil refers to as an attribute, a description of the surah. She distinguishes between the name and an epithet of the surah. As well, in some cases, you have two crosses referring to surah clusters that have a special name. On the screen, Surah 9 has a lot of attributes, but has only two names, Surah at-tauba and barā'a, the first word. So when we look into the names of the Cairo edition and surah names that we know from the literature via Lamiya Kandil's article, we observe for Surah al-Fatiha that we have Surah al-Fatiha, we have Fatihat al-Kitab, Alhamd, a name of Surah 1 that is frequently mentioned in the... I'm sorry, just a second. Small technical problem. So for Surah 1, Surah al-Fatiha, Fatihat al-Kitab, Alhamd, this is actually a name that occurs in sources like al-Farā, Ma'ani al-Qur'an. For Surah 9, we have at-tauba and al-barāʻa. Surah 17, we have two names given, al-Isrāঃ and Banū Isrāījl. For Surah 20, it's Taha and Musa, always leaving away the epithets and attributes of the chapter. And as another example, Surah 112, al-Ikhlas, Qul huwa Allahu ahad, huwa Allahu ahad, as-samad, at-tawhid, al-asas with a cross, al-asas being an attribute. So you see there's a whole range. We have surah names that are actually the first words or the first word of the surah. We have keywords like at-tauba. In Surah 9, the verb taba, yatub, and tauba appears frequently, but we also have keywords like Musa, a name in Surah Maryam. Yeah? So we have the beginning word, the beginning words. We have an important keywords. In two cases, within the Kairiner surah names, we have something completely different for Surah 1, Surah al-Fatiha, and al-Ikhlas for Surah 112. Let us have a close look to the label Fatihat al-Kitab as it is mentioned in Fihres of Ibn Nadīm when he discusses the fact that Abdullah ibn Mas'ud's Quran copy was void of, had no first surah, La Fatihat al-Kitab. And then he discusses it. Fatihat al-Kitab seems to be the label. Actually, the word Fatiha is not part of the text of Surah 1. So one may ask, what kind of term do we have here? In the case of al-Ikhlas, also Surah 112 has a label, a heading of an Ikhlas, which does not appear in the 4 verses of Surah al-Ikhlas. In Fatiha, it might be necessary to look a bit around. In Syriac codicology, the term Ftaha is known for the first the 2 pages, the opening of a codex under the Syriac label Ptaha, as reported in Wright or in Hedge 1946. On the left, you see an illustration for such a petaha from a Bible, an open page. And if you look on the upper edge of the opened pages, you see an aleph and a ba, yeah? So page number 1 and page number 2. This is actually the same understanding of the opening of a book that you find in classical Quran codicology. This has slightly changed in modern times, where the already mentioned Taj Company Limited Quran uses page numbers 2 and 3 for this, following, of course, the customs of modern book printing. The same is true with the opened 2 pages of the Egyptian print on the right, without any page numbers, but at the very bottom on the right, you see page number 4. So that means also the Egyptian, the page numbering of the Egyptian print is following, so to say, the modern model. A preliminary typology of names of the surahs could be given. All what we say today is a bit preliminary. It was a kind of discussion we had in the last week with our guest Enes F. Ali Aghaei was there, and Dirk Hartwig. As I said, he can unfortunately not come today. So we were discussing surah names. So perhaps in a preliminary typology, one would distinguish names following a keyword: Surah al-Baqarah, Surah Maryam. An important word, Surah Tauba, would be the same. As I already mentioned, the verb taba, yatubu, appears frequently in the 9th surah. A second type is a name consisting of the first word or the first words. Another type could be function of the surah. And as we have seen in Lamiya Kandil's study, she mentions attributes which she distinguishes from true names. So if we look into manuscripts, we see in the 10th, 11th century something that is close to what we know today. At-tauba mi'at wa thalathun ayah. We have a name and we have the number of verses. Numbers are frequently mentioned in headings. When we go back in time, we find at-tauba, but frequently in the older codices, we find Fatihat, Surat at-tauba. We find as well Surat at-tauba, and perhaps many other combinations. One also has to say what we present today is preliminary. It is our knowledge about the manuscript evidence is less than complete today. So here in the Indian Codex, I mean, number 1 from Rampur, to make sure that we have at-tauba without surah in the manuscript at the bottom right. It's from a private collection from Stuttgart owned by Mark Merziowski. We have carbon dated this piece, and it has Fatihat Surat at-tauba. Of course, one could argue that the red color might be an addition. It's true. For the moment, we don't know it. So just have a look. We have in a different ink the name, or rather a heading, opening of Surat at-tauba, and then comes the verse numbering. Then in a new style, perhaps 10s, 11, maybe even later, a manuscript has Surat at-tauba, much the way we would know the combination today. Let's have another look into other manuscripts. Surah 9 as at-tauba and Surah al-barāʻa in the Kufi manuscript from Baltimore. The Codex Wetzstein 2, 1913, a carbon-dated copy that could be from the 7th century, if we compare it with other carbon-dated codices, has Surah Barā'a, the second name actually given by Ibn Nadīm. At-tauba alone in another Cambridge codex, and another Cambridge codex on the same page has the same in an ornamented golden line. Interestingly, the expression Fatihat seems to point to a rather more ancient copy, as this Hijazi 3 or 4 codex apparently stored in Istanbul according to the Bergstresser archives 50385 is the label referred to it in Gotthelf Bergstresser's archives. And here we find Fatihat Surat al-Kitab. Also from Bergstresser's archive, a remarkable codex, large in F style, one of the very few F style that is rather classified to be a younger style, but also seems to have the formula of Fatihat, which we also find in a next to complete Codex Imanet 13. In Karatai's catalog, it's EH5 in a quite ancient script, which also reads Fatihat Surat at-tauba. Here we have Tauba, the name that we know today. Interestingly, of course, in the black and white, we cannot distinguish. The heading seems to be from a different hand, or at least from a different pen, maybe the same scribe, but at least in a different color as far as we understand the black and white. So we have Fatihat Khatimat. We will see this keyword Khatimat, closing, opposed to Fatihat. We find both. Then Surat at-tauba with a star marked Fatihat at-tauba, Khatimat at-tauba. I do not see so far in the database of Manuscripta Quranica. And we have in the more classical period at-tauba and also Surat at-tauba. Let's go more to ancient materials. Here we have some surah headings from Surah 20 or Surah 29 and 17 from the Codex in London, where we find usually Fatihat Surat and then Taha, Tauba, or Banū Isrāījl. What I think is written here, it's not really clear, but I think it is rather Banū Isrāījl, written in red ink in an empty space between the surahs. The basmala in all ancient manuscripts, at least those that I'm familiar with, is always written in the basic ink of the texts, whereas the surah headings are always written in an ink distinct from the regular ink. Marcel 9, Codex Amrensis 1, has a manuscript stored to preserve today in St. Petersburg with sister fragments in Paris and London. We have a very simple marking of the surah heading, which actually is no heading. There is no heading, there is no name. We just have a small space and then the basmala starts. The same in another manuscript from Paris, where we just have the line and then dots to fill the line, and then we have Surah 9 starting with Barā'a. There is no heading, no name. A remarkable item is the Codex Parisino Petropolitanus, which has a space between surahs, but also there are text traces are left in red that I could not read out. It would perhaps require some ultraviolet photos to read them, but at least we see that there was perhaps an attempt to, or there were surah headings maybe erased later. We don't know. A remarkable manuscript, Arab 331 from Paris, has a new item that might be interesting for us. On the top, on the right, you see you can recognize the word Khatimat Surat Ibrahim. So we are in the end of Surah 14, labeled here Surat Ibrahim. In the beginning of, what follows is Surah 15. But then we have two letters, a Nun and an Aleph. If we look down, we see a Sad having 3 dots and a Ta. We have similar letters on the left side, and consistently this surah has letters. And it is interesting that here we have use of letter numbers, also in the case of Berlin 4313 manuscript. On the right side, not visibly anymore. We have to ask permission to apply ultraviolet photography. In the Cairo sisters that are labeled in Bergstresser's archive under the call number CAF 47, actually these images, black and white, they are still in Cairo in the Dar al-Kutub, but apparently they have a different call number, which unfortunately I don't know for the moment, and unfortunately we don't have access to color images. The black and white from Bergstresser is good enough to tell us something about Surah, the ending of Surah 9. Yeah, here we are in the end of Surah 9, beginning of Surah 10, and it says Kaf Lam, which is not Qul. My first reading was I confused it with Qul, and I thought, okay, here it means Qul Bismillahirrahmanirrahim at the end of Surah 9, very important since Surah 9 has no basmala. But if you look to the end of another surah, and now I don't know which one is here on the screen, but it has the same system. It has Fa, Qaf and Ta, so it has 109, 109 verses, and for Surah Tauba it has Qaf plus Lam, which means Qaf means 100, and Lam, the letter, means 30. So here we have in 2 important ancient manuscripts that are to be dated before 700. Both of them have been carbon dated. The one in Paris 331, which has sister leaves in Leiden, which we gratefully could carbon date a couple of years ago. And we have the leaves, the 7 parchment leaves from Berlin, which are without any doubt before 700. So at a very early stage, we don't have a name here, but we have numbers. Now numbers, of course, I forgot to mention, at this time in the 7th and 8th century, the only means to write numbers were either to use letter numbers or to write numbers in words. The Arabic numerals, as we know them, appear much later. Ornaments, of course, are also a sign. One of the most famous ancient ornamented manuscripts is Sana'a 2033-1, with beautiful ornaments that were labeled Umayyad ornaments, but of course also the simpler ornaments that we have seen fulfill the same function. Let us switch to another remarkable and unique manuscript, which is the palimpsest. I would like to share with you some 3 headings, or endings rather, of surahs in the reconstruction achieved last year by Hadia Gurtman. It was a work that took several years, and Hadia managed to offer these retracing. I mean, spoiler ahead, the work of Behnam Sadiki is quite consistent with, and one cannot not say that the graphical reconstruction offers now a new text. There are some cases where Hadia's reconstruction help us to understand better, and it visualizes this unique manuscripts. On the left side, you see the photo of the palimpsest in natural life, an ultraviolet photo in blue, and the retracing on the right side. And here we see Khatimat Surat. Yeah? Here we have the term Khatimat preceded by Hadihi, something that I had not in my list in the typology. It sounds a bit, not old-fashioned, but it sounds a bit over-explicit that you find the word Hadihi, Khatimat Surat, and then comes the name followed by the Basmala. An important, since we have seen examples for Surah 9, we should also check Surah 9 in the palimpsest. So you see on the right side natural light, then the ultraviolet image, and then Hadia Gottman's retracings. You see the ornament in a very simple way. It's not an ornament, it's something to fill the line, to mark visually the end of the surah. And then we have a remarkable text starting with the Basmala. Yeah. We are here in Surah 9, yeah. So of course we know that this is the only surah that is not preceded by the Basmala. Here we have the Basmala, and then it says Hadihi Khatimat Surat al-Anfal La taqul Bismillah. Don't say Bismillah, don't say the Basmala, and then the text starts Barā'a. A quite unique passage in front of Surah 9. Behnam Sadiki and Mohsen Buderzi in 2012 have discussed this passage and mentioned that there is, interestingly, a similarity in spelling of al-Anfal and la taqul. Yeah? You see la taqul in the middle of this block in yellow. If you imagine now an aleph added to this, you can interpret this as al-Anfal as well, the qaf and the fa being undistinguishable without diacritical signs. So apparently here, as Sadiki and Buderzi suggest, there was a confusion for the scribe, not in terms that he confused the words, but for a moment somehow he probably was not sure if everything is complete in this doubling of glyphs. What is important here is that we really see in an explicit mode a kind of command given in the codex, and we would suggest, and we could assume perhaps that they were used for means of prayer or in a liturgical context, but we find here this explicit statement, La taqul Bismillah, which is not to be observed in any other manuscript. We find, to complete this vision of the Sana'a palimpsest as well, ornaments that are a bit more constructed and developed. And here in the end, finally, of Surah 9, we find Khatimat Surat at-tauba. There seems to have been an aleph, and so the aleph is visible. The traces of the lam were too weak, perhaps covered by something on the upper layer. Yeah? And then could be a hook for a T, a waw, and in the next line, preceding the ornament, we have a hook, and the letter ha could be a tauba. So beginning of surahs beginnings of surahs are marked by an empty line, an empty space, the line is not filled, an ornament, an illumination, heading written in a different ink is important. This is consistently the case. And one could say also the basmala of the following chapter, but the basmala usually is written in the same ink. So preliminary conclusion of these impressions when I went through the data in our databases. Early manuscripts attest a small number of variants for surah names, smaller than the list of names and attributes of Muslim scholarly tradition mentioned in Lamiya Kandil. The names consist of first words, keywords, sometimes a function. For those terms mentioned in Cairo. We have Fatihat al-Kitab, the codicological function, and we have the monotheistic confession, Surat Ikhlas, function in the sense of a pragmatic understanding of linguistics. By pronouncing, reciting Surat Ikhlas, you give a confession of the true creed. Number two, there seems to be a correlation between tradition and manuscripts. The terms attested in manuscripts are listed in Kandil, not the other way necessarily around. Not all of these attributes, we don't see them in the manuscripts. The end of a surah and beginning of the following marked by empty space and ornament illustration is surah heading, usually, or example given. There are many combinations, but usually you have a couple of returning elements out of which the headings are built. Fatihat, Surat, the name, Wahiyya, and then the number, and then what you count, Ayah, the verses. In the surah ending, it would be often the same formula, Khatimat, Surat, and the name, and then the number. We have frequent attestation of terms Fatiha, beginning, and Khatima, ending. Khatima seems to be more frequently attested in early manuscripts, at least based on the material that is accessible to us. All this is very preliminary because we don't have access to the complete picture, and all you know that, and you all know that in Istanbul and in Sana'a and in many parts of the world, there are still thousands of fragments to be discovered. 5 early manuscripts, early, I mean before 700 Christian era, you have Fatihat, Khatimat plus the surah plus the name, and later the name or surat of the name. This could be a development. Again, we still don't see the complete picture. A remarkable case is Arab 331 and Berlin 4313, where we have the numbers of verses in abjad numerals at the end of surahs, but no name and no heading in the sense we have seen it before. Yeah, the talk or our get-together today has used maybe a wrong metaphor in the melancholical poem that Umberto Eco quotes. It's about the name that stays and all other things fade in time. The surah name is a bit different. The surah name to us seems inaccessible in many cases, and the text is well preserved. In early Quranic manuscripts, headings ending surah names were not part of the text. This is something clear, obvious, maybe not necessary to say to you. Contrary to the Basmala, headings and endings are always written by a different ink. If names appear, they are written in different ink, and often the name is followed by numbers of verses. There seems to be a link between something that we would label a name and the fact that you count, control of the text. One also should mention here that we have, from the early period before, so to say, the period where we have already, let's say, in the period before Sibawayh and Khalil ibn Ahmad, during the first 150 years, we are not very much aware of scholarly literature, at least it is not preserved to us in a written shape, where we would see how people quote, how people refer to textual units of the Quran. Except numbers of verses and names, no other information about the surah is attested so far. This also concerns colophons. We never see colophons in these early texts, at least before the year, roughly speaking, 900. And in many early codices also, no name of the unit is given. My observations stop here. We will move now to the second talk. It could be Enes. Yeah, I have the PowerPoint here. After Enes Onur, Ali Aghaei perhaps will present briefly about Iran manuscripts about some Iranian collections. And after this third part, we have a discussion. So just a second, I have to adjust the PowerPoint of Enes Onur. So, Enes, I'm very happy that you were with us the last 4 weeks. Enes has written his master thesis in Ankara University. He is currently assistant in the divinity faculty. He is preparing a PhD about the context of the Quran, is interested in all the context literature in various languages. But during his stay in Berlin, we had a lot of discussion about empirical evidence, dating the manuscripts, and Enes shared with us some also preliminary ideas about echoes of narrations on early Quranic manuscripts and surah headings. And floor is open, Enes, looking forward. Here is...
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Allow me to begin with a narrative that we find, a narration that we find in Surah Rasulullah of Ibn Ishaq. Here, when Muslims take over the control of the land of Shustar, Muslims find a body of a person believed to be the body of Prophet Daniel in the Baytul Mal of Hormuzan. So Muslims also find a mushaf by the body of, as I said, the person believed to be Daniel. And when Umar ibn al-Khattab sees this, he calls Ka'b, or bin Ka'b, and wants him to translate the book. And Ka'b says, فَنَسَخَهُ بِالْعَرَبِيَّةِ. So Ka'b translates it into Arabic, and he says he's the first Arab who read it, and also he adds he recited it as he recites the Quran. قَرَأْتُهُ مِثْلَ مَا أَقْرَأُ الْقُرْآنَ. So in this narration, one can argue that there was sort of a awareness of the value of the written religious material. And it's not really surprising, perhaps, that it was this mindset existent there in the early Islamic community, that today we see so many Quranic manuscripts datable to the early ages of Islam. So reading different Islamic narrations through literary sources, we might wonder whether or not can we see the echoes of the Islamic narrations in early Quranic manuscripts. Here, I would like to walk you through the tefsir narrations, early Quranic exegesis, the literature of early Quranic exegesis, and also early Quranic manuscripts. Here, I prefer to say Surah 96, since it is rather a natural term to refer to Surah. So as we dive into the early Islamic narrations, what we see is that typically the Surah was known under at least 3 names: اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق, اقرأ باسم ربك, and اقرأ. Here, typically, this surah was referred with a statement that أول سورة نزلت اقرأ باسم ربك, or أول سورة اقرأ باسم ربك, or mentioning of a sajda verse, a verse of sajda, saying that there's there is a verse of sajda in اقرأ باسم ربك, in al-Najm, and in إذا السماء انشقت, as we see a narration ascribed to Abu Huraira here. So these are the examples that we find. In another narration that we say that ascribed to Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, هو كان يسجد في النجم إذا السماء انشقت وإقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق. So what we see here is that was not epithet, but just the name that they used while referring to the surahs here. An interesting, rather interesting example here, we have a narration from Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri that he says, Prophet received the first verses of the Surah Iqra Bismi Rabbik in a kind of ornamented envelope, like in a kind of fancy envelope, which is really hard to actually translate, in which a letter was kept. In Arabic, bimanat min dibash fihi maktub. So, since we're dealing with different names of the surahs in the history, it might be good to take a look at the order of surahs in the codex of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud in Ibn Ashtas al-Masahib, according to Suyūṭī. Here, I think we are able to see that many surahs were known rather in a different name. For example, 13, al-Isrāء is known Banū Isrāījl. It is the Iqra Bismi Rabbik. Also, we see it here, tauba, as we say, al-barāʻa. Here we can see that. So it's not just one or two surahs, but rather different surahs. In our study, there seems to be no narration with isnad referring to the surah by the name alaq. Actually, this is rather reasonable when we see the early Quranic manuscripts. We will get there. Yeah. So as what about the early Islamic literature? Muqatil bin Sulaiman is the earliest tefsir book completed, the whole complete tefsir book. Today we see in his modern edition, we see the surah was named as alaq, but this I suspect that this is rather anachronism here. For three reasons. First of all, it is incompatible. It seems to be incompatible with early Quranic manuscripts. Second, incompatible with early Islamic tradition. And third, various books that we have received claim that written at those ages. So, and also in the literature, we see that, for example, Shahristani says that's Iqra, according to that Muqatil refers to the surah as Iqra. We also read that. So it's pretty much close what we see in the narrations, in the books that in the books of people lived in 2nd century of Hijrah, 9th century AD that we see. But in Ibn Qutayb, for example, Tirmizi, he's one of the scholars, brings the narrations, collects the narrations. He brings the narrations under the title of Surah Iqra Bismi Rabbik. So in Qutayba, in his tafsir, we see that the editor's edition alaq, but the manuscript is clearly says Iqra, as we see here. This is an example that the modern editors prefer to use the known names rather the ones on the manuscripts. In the case of Tabari is also the case, though the editor says alaq, when we read the text, it is Iqra. So anachronistic feature in modern text edition also takes place there too. In Maturidi, when we look at the Maturidi's tafsir, we see various manuscripts with the name Iqra and alaq. So, but here we actually start to see a change in the name of Surah 96, seems to be the case in the 4th century that we see. What about can we see some historical echoes in early Quranic manuscript, all the things that we have just shared here? Let's just take a look at it. In manuscript Quranica, we studied the Quranic manuscripts in Manuscripta Quranica, and we have 22 early manuscripts for Surah 96 in the database, and 16 manuscripts with Surah names and the verse number, whereas 3 manuscripts with no Surah heading, as we see on the left, and also with 3 manuscripts with only ornaments, as we see on the right. As you take a look at this first manuscript, we see that it's Fatihatu, so it will be Arabic, as we can read the one here, the text that we have here. Of course, it could be argued that these surah headings were rather added later, but still, it gives us a glimpse in how the surah was known in the history. Again, in Weststein to 1943, we also see Fatihatu Yaqwa Bismi Rabbik. In another manuscript, rather before 900s, after Hijrah, 2nd or 3rd century, we also see Fatihatu Bismi Rabbik alladhi khalaq. So here we also all the time see that these manuscripts with the enumeration of the verses and the surah title. And Iqra Bismi Rabbik, again, Iqra Bismi and Iqra. Here we can see different examples. Many, as we look, it's just Iqra and Iqra, or Fatihatu Iqra Bismi Rabbik. So none of these manuscripts have exactly the same name of the name Allah in the manuscript. But here we have actually, as we say, by the 6th century, we here see a manuscript. So it's written Allah, just this one right here, now right below, it has colophon. The earliest attestation for the name Allah, we can say that it's barely visible. It's in gold ink, but we can see al-alaq here. This can be maybe dated after 900 AD, after like late 3rd century. We might date it. Here we see Allah, Ashuna Ayah. So this is rather the only relatively early attestation for the name Allah. And this is another example where we see that the surah with no really heading, no name, later edited by the people who wanted to recite the Quran on this mushaf. They just added Surah Al-Alaq here, but as we can see, it is rather very, very late addition into this particular mushaf. So it seems Iqra Bismi Rabbika Allazi Khalaq wa Bismi Rabbika Iqra seem to be rather archaic names for the surah 96, whereas Al-Alaq is relatively late. But this should not lead us to think that the old Quranic manuscripts with these names are as old as the early Quranic manuscripts, because in a study by Gözeler, Esra Gözeler, she studied the manuscripts in Vatican Library, and here we see rather late Quranic manuscripts. It can be dated by colophon or the script, this style of script there, rather like after ADs, 700s, 1600s. So yeah, so then these names also continue to be used. In preliminary conclusion, here we say that the surah name of Surah 96 ascribed to companions and successors, so the tefsir traditions in traditional sources are the following three: Iqra Bismi Rabbika Allazi Khalaq, Iqra Bismi Rabbika, and Iqra. All is attested in the Quranic manuscript, early Quranic manuscripts, but Iqra just attested 8 times, Iqra Bismi Rabbika attested 4 times. I have not found any attestation in Islamic narrations having isnad for the name Alaq. as the name of the Surah 96. Of course, this doesn't mean that there is no, but even if there is, they are rather rare, and we will not really easily see that. This might actually explain why in the early Quranic manuscripts, the surah was headed under the name of Iqra, right? So it's quite actually reasonable to think that since the early generations there use a particular name to refer to surah, the other generations came after, or in the ages that we see these Quranic manuscripts, we also see the abundant amount of manuscripts with the name Iqra and not Alaq. The name Alaq is attested one time in a manuscript datable after 900 AD. The name seems to get on the stage during 3rd and 4th centuries. Anachronistic feature in modern text edition that we see, it was used at the time of others seems to be rather neglected. About the enumeration of the verses in Surah 96, 10 manuscripts enumerate 19 verses, and 5 manuscripts enumerate 20 verses. So in Islamic tradition, different views on enumeration of the verses of Surah 96 are not really attested here. So therefore, based on at least on a preliminary level, empirical evidences, they do not seem to be widely accepted. So surah headings in conclusion, just surah headings of the Quranic manuscripts are empirical evidences which should be used in the studies of ulum al-Qur'an also. So surah's name, the enumeration of the verses, a few of the late manuscripts also have the information about the Makki Madani verses. So in order to have a scientific arguments there. The study that I have just shown you is just a little bit tiny, humble study of mine. But with the materials available today, we can do much more than this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Enes. So next speaker is Ali, about surah headings, surah names in manuscripts from Iranian collections, manuscripts that were digitized and are to be published and accessible soon on Ali's Iran Quran publication. And we will need 2 minutes to put his presentation on the screen. So please. After Ali's presentation, we will have some questions. As I said, there are some participants from Turkey today, and it might be that there are questions in Turkish, English, 2 languages allowed. And Enes will moderate the discussion. You can also write in the chat, but now have a quick coffee. I think we need 2 minutes now to get hold of the presentation. The technical system here in Berlin, the academy, is not that simple. Could you present from here? Yeah? Okay, then you can already stay, Ali. So, PDF. So Ali, floor is yours. I hope it works technically. One last. So please.
Thank you very much. So yeah, thank you, Enes and Michael Marx for the interesting material that you have already presented. I have not a lot to add here. I'm just went through a little bit the manuscript that we have already worked in our Iranian collections, and I tried to make sense of the information that I have got from this manuscript. So before I start, we had the opportunity to the project Iran Quran, third-party project of Corpus Coranicum in Berlin, Brandenburg Academy of Sciences in Berlin. We had the opportunity to get access to Iranian manuscripts and to the National Museum of Iran and the Quranic manuscript in the National Museum. So we made a kind of digitization of the oldest manuscript that they have. And we also got the permission to carbon date some of the manuscripts. That was a very great opportunity that we had in Iran. So here's a kind of overview of the results of the carbon dating of 7 parchment Quran manuscripts in Iranian in the National Museum of Iran of Quranic manuscripts. And as you see, we got very interesting results from the carbon dating. So one of the manuscripts is really early, going back to the 1st or 2nd century, Islamic 7th, 8th century. And it's in B style. In another manuscript in D style, we have also got very early results, 7th, 8th century. And the other results from these styles manuscripts are in the same line of we have already talked about. So 8th century. And also about C style, we got some results between 8th and 9th century, 2nd, 3rd centuries. So this was kind of this gave us a kind of measurement for our understanding of the developments in the early Kufi manuscripts, because the other datings that we had by Corpus Coranicum were always concerned with the Hijazi, much earlier manuscripts. So that was a kind of opportunity to develop our understanding of Kufi manuscripts that we have in Iranian collections. So what I'm presenting here is a result, is a kind of display of the information that you can get from the manuscript dating between very early 1st century to 3rd century. So it's such a wide range of time. So I mentioned, I used a lot from the first manuscript, 4251, which is very early manuscript at latest 2nd century, Hijri manuscript. So it's a very old manuscript. So many of the information that we get here are from this manuscript, but the others also are not that late. They are all belong to the same period of second, third, or at latest 4th century. So I made another kind of typology of surah names in comparison to what Michael Marx already presented. So I'm much more on formal level. So we have different kinds of names in the manuscripts. I didn't compare with the tradition, so only what we find in the manuscript. So first and the most frequent is the common name, as we know also today, famous names. Almost 60 surahs, 58, 59, depends how it counts, are exactly the same names that we know and are familiar with us. We are familiar with. So the the other names that we get are a little bit different from the common names. One name I didn't find in any Quranic Kufi manuscript in the National Museum, the Surah Ashura. So there is no Ashura in the manuscripts, and not only in Kufi manuscript, but also I compared also with the other manuscript. I didn't find. Maybe I missed something. And the other stuff are like we find kind of archaic naming in the sense of I will show you. I will show it in detail. So we go through. So this is the common names, exactly the same name as you find everywhere. You find also in the manuscripts. Then we have this kind of archaic naming, I would call it, because Al-Fatiha, of course, it's kind of a shortened version of Fatiha al-Kitab, of course, as already mentioned by Michael Marx. And but the other names are also common in the tradition. Yudhkar fiha something. So this is the, I would call it, older version of the name of the surah. So the surah in which this thing is mentioned, al-Baqarah or a room or a kind of very particular event or particular object or something is mentioned in that surah. So we find these names also in early manuscripts. So this is 4251, which is dated by carbon dating, and it has Fatiha al-Kitab, and also it has Surah Yudhkar fiha Ruh, or Surah Yudhkar fiha al-Ahzab. So this is, as you see, we also expect in such an early manuscript. And I have to say that we studied this manuscript in detail, and everything belongs to the same production period, production time. It's not separate. You cannot say that it's added in the later period, because the whole was done in a group, a teamwork. We have studied and we have very good evidence of that. Another thing that you find is that you find in the a little bit later Kufi manuscript, the oath, which is already the common name, the famous name, but the vow is there. So it's the oath of the beginning of the surah. So it's not tur, but what tur, not an-Najm, but one Najm. So it's mentioned together with waw al-Qasam. Like these manuscripts, these are later. Some of them also are not on parchment, but on paper. But as you see, you find here, for example, one Najm and examples of different manuscripts. Another common naming is we already know in the common names, Surah Taha, Surah Sa'd. These are common disconnected letters that are name of the surah. Interestingly, we find also more disconnected letters as the name of the surah, like Surah An-Naml. We find, of course, An-Naml in some manuscripts, but we find also Tasin, which is Surah An-Naml. Or Ashura, I didn't find Ashura, but we find Ain Sin Ghaf. And in a very strange case, Hamim, which is strange because we have a lot of Hamim, but this maybe because this one was very special. And Nun, which is very famous, so not Surah Al-Qalam, but Surah An-Nun. And then here are examples, 4251 again, Surah Tasin, 3454, a little later, but still Surah Nun. In later manuscript, you find also Surah Nun, still not An-Naml. Sorry, Al-Ghalam. And Ain Sin Ghaf also in later manuscripts you find. So another way of naming is a combination of disconnected letters and these unique names or the common names. So Ash-Shu'ara is Qasim Mim Ash-Shu'ara, and also the others. Aqafir you don't find, of course, we know that. So it's Mu'min, but Hamim Mu'min. Sajda or Hamim Sajda. Shura you don't find, but you find Hamim Ain Sin Ghaf. So it's this Hamim, you see all of the Hamim surahs here. So it's a combination of the famous name and disconnected letters. And I didn't put the images, so it's clear. So another way of which is interesting for me of naming is a combination of the first word of the manuscript together with the familiar name. So Surah Saba is Hamd because the surah starts with Alhamd. So Saba is Hamd Saba. So it's and we also can imagine why Surah Al-Fatiha is also famous as Alhamd. So it's the same structure. So Surah Saba, Hamd Saba, Fatir, Hamd Fatir. And Az-Zumar, Tanzil, because the surah starts with Tanzilun Minna. And Zumar is added to the. And Sabbih is the starting of this Surah Al-Hadid and Surah Al-Saf. Is to also, and these kind of things you find also in the earlier manuscript, the Hijazi or early Kufi manuscripts, and then in the later manuscript as well. So this is the famous OR 2165 in British Library. You find Hamd Saba, and in 4251 you find Tanzil Az-Zumar. So it's a combination of both. And Sabbih al-Hadid, again the same manuscript, and Sabbih al-Saf, or Sabbaha. So it's Sabbaha Lillahi. So another type of names is a group of words, as mentioned already by Michael Marx. So first words of the surah. So إذا جاءك المنافقون. So which surah you are saying? It's the surah إذا جاءك المنافقون. So it's a whole combination of actually the first the verse of the surah. And as you see, in some of these are not exactly from the beginning. For example, Ash-Shamsu Kubrat. So not إذا الشمس كبرت, but الشمس كبرت, or Sama Infatarat. But some of them are already from the beginning. And here are examples again, 4251, Surah إذا جاءك المنافقون, Surah ويل للمطففين. And another group of naming that you find in the early manuscript is you find other names than the famous common names. So Surah al-Isrāঃ is famous, of Banū Isrāījl is very famous. Surah Taha is interestingly called Musa in some of the manuscripts. Al-Mu'minun is called Al-Anbiya. We have already another Al-Anbiya. But this surah is also called Al-Anbiya. Fatir al-Malaika. Sad, the famous Surah Sad, is called Dawood, because the story of David is coming in the same surah. And Ghafir, which is famous Al-Mu'min, Al-Qamar is called also as-Sā'a. It's clear because of the combination. And Tahrim is an-Nabi, because this is a direct order to the Prophet. So it's I think that was the reason to call it an-Nabi. And al-Insan, and that famous. Shams is also called, Shams is very famous, actually, the name of surah, but it's called an-Naga, which is the only place that you find the Naga story in this in the Quran. And other, so al-Masad Abu Lahab is also interesting. So here, for example, and another example, not from the National Museum, but it's from the British Library. So here, Fatiha Surah Al-Anbiya, which is not Surah Al-Anbiya, it's Surah Al-Mu'minun. It's not Surah Al-Anbiya, yeah? So, and I mean, it's Surah Al-Anbiya, but not our famous Surah Al-Anbiya. And Surah Musa, as I said, it's a Surah Taha, which is Surah Musa now. Yeah? In very early manuscript, it's 4255, dated by carbon dating, is very early. And Surah Dawood also, the same manuscript. And Naga, in another manuscript later, but still very old Kufi manuscript. So it's a Surah Al-Naga and a Surah Al-Sā'a, again the same 4251. And interestingly, Surah Al-Isrāঃ is called Surah Al-Aqsa. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I'm not sure if you find this in the tradition. I didn't compare. But this is very interesting because this is the only place that you find Al-Aqsa, yeah, in the whole Quran. It's interesting. So Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. So it's and Surah Subhan, again, because of the beginning. So we have different names for Surah Al-Isra. I prepared this because our colleague wanted to present something about that. I prepared also some examples. So we have different names for Surah Al-Isra, Al-Aqsa. Subhan, because of the beginning of the surah, Surah Banū Isrāījl, and that was about Surah Al-Isra. And for Surah As-Sajda, it's also called, because of the beginning, At-Tanzil. So Tanzil, because it's Tanzilul Kitab at the beginning, after the disconnected letters. Alif Lam Tanzil, which is a combination of the name, and if we consider name as Tanzil, then disconnected letter added to that, so combination of disconnected letter and the name. So Alif Lam Tanzil As-Sajda. So Alif Lam Mim Tanzil As-Sajda, all together in one. Here As-Sajda in another example, and here we find Sajda in different manuscripts. So that was a very short overview of the examples that we find, and it shows how insightful are the information when we go through the details into the manuscript. So and we can also get more interesting results when we put the chronological anchors into the whole information, and we have this fortunate situation that we could date several manuscripts in this collection. So this gives us the possibility to create a kind of read of chronological order of the manuscripts, and then we can compare the data and to infer how the development of the naming of surahs during the time happened in practice, not only in the tradition. Of course, we can study the tradition as well, but here we have the material evidence. So the name, when it's mentioned in the manuscript, is as a kind of reflection of the common famous names among the scholars at that period, or even among the people, because people also use the manuscript. So it's a kind of mirror of the a kind of sociological condition of the manuscript, not only the tradition, but also the history of the Muslim practices. Thank you very much for the time.
Yeah, thank you very much. I have learned a lot, and it shows that there's much more to say about surah names than, at least I can say it for me, than I was convinced of. And the material you have shown, Ali, shows that there's plenty to discover. I had the impression that so to say, Iranian manuscript, of course, we don't know where they have been produced. They are movable objects. Maybe they were produced in Egypt or in Syria and then brought to Iran. But I had the impression the Iranian manuscripts had a complete different range of names than those that I had seen. But again, our vision and horizon is not very complete. Also important is empirical evidence, as Enes has shown us, also how it is reflected in modern print editions, where, so to say, in an anachronistic way, labels are used that have never probably been used by the author of which the edition is produced. So there are very different angles to face and to describe the problem. I'm also very happy about the competing typology. I still hope that the truth is somewhere in the middle, and then Enes and also Dirk, when he is back, will contribute. So anyhow, enough said. Thanks to everybody. Thanks for listening. And now we have the discussion. Use the chat. Enes is following the chat. And yeah. Nice to see you on the screen. You can, in case you have questions. I have the impression that after a certain time we should come back to this subject. Not next week, not in 2 months, but I think there is much to observe, to learn, and perhaps to look at, develop a suitable typology for all this. So, floor is open, but maybe there are questions here. I don't know, you just can speak. Our technical device will automatically move to the direction where your voice comes from. Please. Enes, loud.
I actually have a question. Mr. Aghaei, like you said that the Surah Anbiya, the name used in a different surah. What about the Surah Anbiya in that particular codex? How was it then called? Like, it's interesting, because very interesting.
I have to check my statistics here. I have a list of the names prepared, the list.
If you like, Ali, I can open here your PDF again. It's your own statistic.
So,
okay.
I have to look at my Excel file to see. Yeah. Okay.
Because actually, it seems rather common for a name to be used in a different surah, like different names used for different surahs, but not the case of a name of a surah used in a different surah. Like al-Hamd, not for example, Isra, Banū Isrāījl, for that.
Yeah, so what I can see here in my, I have kind of gathered the information, not only from the National Museum, but also from the other manuscripts that we have data in our system. So Surah Al-Anbiya itself is called always Surah Al-Anbiya. So it belongs to the group that I mentioned, the 60 surah that always have the same name. So Surah Al-Anbiya is Surah Al-Anbiya, even in the same manuscript. Yeah, in the same manuscript, it is called also Surah al-Anbiya. So, and this is also interesting. So we have Fatiha Surah al-Anbiya here in 2165, and in the other case also we have the same. So for the people who produce the names, for them it's not it was not a problem as far as I can see. So this the same.
What do you mean by problem?
I mean, why we have one name for two surahs? That was not a big deal.
Okay. Yeah. Other questions? Our session went much longer than I had imagined. Yet last week, on short note, we decided to get together and discuss this, and turns out that we had very rich presentations, a lot of material, in Ali's case, exclusive material. We are still grateful for this opportunity that we could work in Iran, in the National Museum, a situation that seems to me today unimaginable, if I may say so. Other questions? I don't know, in English, Turkish, Arabic. If not, I'm also happy to close this section early, and I can only say from my side, I would be happy to get together again for the same topic, the name of the surah, and maybe other features. Initially, we had mentioned also features like the basmala, the case of Surah 9, the basmala in Fatiha. Is it a part of the surah or not? These, I'm rather convinced that one of these questions will bring us back together soon. Thank you very much. There's a hand now. Enes, can you check this? There is a sign which is from Smeen. Yeah, you just can talk. If you open
Hello.
your camera.
Yeah,
Hello.
sorry to come into this so late. But from my data perspective, I wonder, I think there are no, since the identity of some of the surahs, not the identity, but the name giving is quite ambiguous, it kind of rings the bell of my librarian mind that it is actually quite important to index those properly, and to include this in the Corpus Coranicum project, to create a kind of small concordance, if you want, or basically an index with unique numbers for each surah, including their ambiguities. Have you thought about that?
Not yet. It's in movement. We don't want to exclude this for the moment. I think we have. I don't know if we can take care of it on so to say a digital level. But of course, it's important, as you say, to include this kind of information. I'm still struggling with the typology for the features. Ali has a different one, and I'm sure there are many possibilities to classify the material. All that we can say is, in the manuscript, a whole range is to be observed. Are you thinking about XML or TEI documentation?
Well, I mean, the technology behind it is one thing, but perhaps to express it more in a kind of humanities type of language is, or perhaps I should place a question: is it is the content comparable enough to say that the ambiguity is with the name giving and the numbering, or is that ambiguity also reflected in the content?
Oh, I don't know. Do you mean in the content of the text?
Yes.
Do you mean I don't know. I would say no, but I give it to Ali and Enes. I don't know. What's your opinion? I wouldn't say the content is distinct. Yeah, the name giving, the reference, the ornamentation also. Yeah, in much of the Kufic manuscripts, it's also there is a very how to say, sophisticated approach. It has to do with art. These manuscripts often are pieces of art, golden ink and so on. Ali, what do you think? Different content? Yes or no? I mean, you can always say every Surah 21 is different because it will have other diacritical signs. Many features are different. What do you think, Ali?
My take is that we have, as you already mentioned in your presentation, it's that the text of the Quran is something that people were very keen to keep it as a kind of fixed text. But for the rest, the flexibility is visible in the Muslim tradition, and it is not something hidden, as Enes already presented. You can see that in the Muslim tradition that they were not very. I mean, they were not so conservative to take not only one option, so they were open to different options to name surahs according to their convenience. And interestingly, I just checked the question of Enes. So in 2165, the British Library, so Surah Al-Anbiya is the name of Surah Al-Anbiya today, and Surah Al-Mu'minun. And the person who has written the names wasn't the same person. So it shows us that they had no inconvenience to have a name for two different surahs, and it shows us the flexibility of the community in that direction. But back to the first question, yes, we digitize all of this information. What I have is not by hand. I just asked the machine to give me back a report of all of the names, existing names. And as you already know, we have developed a very powerful system in Quran for transliteration and transcription of the manuscripts of Iranian collections, but also we improved it to also cover the Corpus Coranicum manuscripts. So, and we are doing now at the moment that. So we are transliterating again the manuscripts that are already in Corpus Coranicum in our system. So what I have presented here is not only I made myself strict to the National Museum, but I gave you some examples of others. These examples comes from the same machine. So we have a very powerful registration of all of this information in a digital shape. For surah headings, we didn't go through details because of the problem of typology, as Michael Marx already mentioned. So we need a very clear and I don't know, powerful typology that covers our needs. Then we can also improve the digital registration in that direction. So and it took it takes us not a lot of time because we have already registered the information in the system. So we have a digital version of all of them. And the only thing that should be done manually, of course, not by machine, manually should be done, is to register the details, the typological details into the system. But we need, first of all, to reach a kind of conclusion about which typology is better. Yeah. And I have my own suggestions. We have Michael Marx, which is very helpful for tracing the historical development of the thing. So we have this Fatiha Khatima in the very early period. It was absent in my manuscripts. So that was why I didn't think about that. So in my typology, there is no mention of these things because it's absent. But in the earlier manuscript, we have this kind of other items should be also considered in the typology. And then we can get, when we add to this information, the chronological order, which we have a lot. We have dated.
You mean chronological order in carbon dating? Yeah?
Exactly. Yes. And in combination with the script styles. When we have this grid of the dating, then we can really show how the naming of surahs during the period of time developed or changed from the very beginning until the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th century, even until today. So we have a real dating. For manuscript of 5th, 6th, and later centuries, we have colophons. So it's perfect. For early period of time, we have a lot of datings. Now we are now on a very solid basis of chronological order. We digitize the information of the manuscripts. The next step is to combine these two with each other. So we give the machine the information. This is the chronological order. Just give a report how the name of Surah X developed during the time in a table. You get the result. So this is the thing that we are developing at the moment.
So you're working with identifiers. I mean, I'm just saying it's really important because you have these different data sets, these different groups of digital, that you are very clear about the identification of the text, regardless of style, time, surah name, surah number, anything. So that this identification of the text itself is compatible between all your different data sets. That would be really good. And then from that, it'd be very interesting to develop a whole series of contextual information that can then be extrapolated. But yeah, I was just wondering if you have that in place, if you always know exactly what.
Yes, I mean, it's a process, of course, and I think we start, Ali and me, we start with empirical evidence, what we see, and this is always a bit, it's always a bit incomplete, and then you discover more and more, and yes, so I think it would be lovely to get back to also to have you perhaps next time and check according to standards. In library standards or TEI standards, how to deal with this naming of textual units. I have asked my colleague Annette von Stockhausen here in this building how biblical books are mentioned in the church father, in the scholarly writing of the church fathers. There seems to be, that's what I learned in a brief get-together, there seems to be a conventional system to refer to Genesis, to Exodus, the prophets, the Psalms, and so on. Also different types of names, but they seem to be standardized. In the Quran, perhaps we discover also regional standards, we still don't know, but the problem as such is not yet touched. And Lamiya Kandil's very useful article from 1992 is almost empty from empirical manuscript evidence, and there's plenty to discover until the modern period. Banū Isrāījl or Bani Israel, Surah Bani Israel, as we have seen, is still living in India, and I'm sure that there is much more to discover. Next time you are with us, Yasmin, and if there are people among you in the audience, it would be lovely, I don't know, to get your remarks. You can email to Enes, Ali, or to me, and maybe second half of the year we get together. Just another type of advertisement at this occasion. In September, we have a summer academy in the same building here. We are in the academy wing of the Staatsbibliothek building. We have sent it around already. Would be lovely to have applications from students. I cannot see all the names. Yeah, maybe we will send it to you. The announcement is from 18th to 23 of September in Berlin. It's organized by Staatsbibliothek, Al-Furqan Foundation, and our academy here.
Okay.
Other questions? Thank you, Yasmin. Other questions from here? I don't know. I cannot see any.
In the chat,
In the chats, please, Enes, take over. I cannot see.
Okay, it's in English actually. After what as we know, surahs can have many names. This clearly shows that these surahs were brought by humans, people. Is there any surah with the same name or a single name in the Quranic manuscripts or tefsir narrations?
This is a question to you, right? Enes, go ahead. Loud.
Is there a surah with the same name or a single name in the Quranic manuscripts? I'm not sure that if I understood correctly, but pretty much all the narrations that we see in the literature, we are also able to attest and get them attested in the early Quranic manuscripts, pretty much, and I think they are very compatible with what we have in the traditions and what we have in the early Quranic manuscripts. For example, as I just actually draw attention to the point that we don't really see the name Arab in the early ages of the Islam, as well as we don't really see the name Arab to refer the surah in the traditions. So it actually makes more reasonable to think that the surah names were not actually kind of put in the codexes out of blue, like they have sort of something that they considered and then they use them in a context, in the codexes. So that's what I can say. I don't know if I understood correctly. I'm not really sure. But
there seems to be a second question in the chat. Please check it.
I have a question. Aisha says.
You can also say it on the screen or as you prefer, or you read it to us. The next question.
Hi, everyone.
Yes.
Thank you so much for your presentations, for your contributions to us. I couldn't listen some part of the session because my baby cried a lot, so sorry. If it was said before, I'm really sorry, but my question is that we see differences in the names of surah, clearly. Do these names of surah show any regional similarity? Or these preference like the preference of Arabs or preference of Turks, it could be. And could it be related to Musaf's policies of these countries? I mean, could it be a mandatory option? I don't know, Yani.
Yes, understood. To who do you ask?
Ayşenur İbaçınar.
Yes.
In Jordan, I'm living in Jordan.
Yes. No. Which one from us do you ask? I think it's to Ali maybe, or who do you ask? Is your question directed to Ali, to Enes, or to me? Please.
Actually, I know you all of related this issue. I don't know who can answer.
I can just say from my side, everything is possible. I think we are just in the beginning of seeing the materials by developing ideas and standards, how to describe it. So we're in a very, there is observation, there is description, and at a very later stage, there is some explanation, classification, regional standards. Since manuscripts are movable objects, we have to prepare that some of the parts, even if we know the place where they were preserved, might not have been produced there. But I expect that we will discover regional standards. Ali, what's your...
I can add here something that each manuscript has its own features and characteristics. And for later manuscript, I'm not talking about the earlier manuscript, Hijazi manuscript, which in the later period also some stuff were added into them, like maybe surah names, maybe dots for vocalization added to the early manuscript. But in the Kufi manuscripts, it's a teamwork always. And we studied examples of that in the National Museum, and I have enough argumentation in that direction that the manuscript was a production of a team, of a group of people who containing one scribe or several scribes, and people of illumination, and people who did dotting, for vocalization. So this, all of this information are in the manuscripts. So what is missing here, we never studied that. So in the Iran Quran project, we started to register all of the information in each manuscript completely into a powerful data set. So the translation is done. The next step is vocalization, and then also we take care of the separations, the verse counting, and each surah heading also has a total number of surah. Of the verses of each surah. And these information are unique to regions. And we know this from tradition. So when we have this information analyzed, first of all, registered in one powerful database, and secondly, analyzed, then we can talk more about the context of each manuscript. So when we find a name in one manuscript, what is missing is from which region. And this is not a secret. This is already in the manuscript, but we never studied them. So we have to study them to see to which region this manuscript belongs. And then we add to this information the dates. We have a lot of dated manuscripts. We can put also other manuscripts in the same grid because of the script style. Then we get dates. Then you can attach to the information not only the surah name, but also from which region, which period of time. And this whole give us a complete new understanding of the history of manuscripts. So this is missing. Why we are so slow? Because it's very time consuming. So to transliterate a manuscript completely, I mean, what is already done by scholars in this direction is always case studies. So people take 10 examples, 50 words in the Quran, and they go through, I don't know, 50 manuscripts, check, and that's it. We don't work like that. We register each character separately in the system. Then we can ask the machine, give us a report, compare manuscript A with manuscript B, and tell me what is the differences. If they are in, I don't know, 90% are close, then they belong to the same region. If they are so different, then they belong to different regions. And then we have information from the tradition, regional information. Then we can combine those information with our information, and we get a very precise answer to the question of regionality, about period of time, about development of the, not only the name of surahs, but also the verse numbering, the changes of numbers. One of the manuscripts that we have studied, 4251 that I showed several images, we have studied it deeply. So verse counting does not match the total number of numbers. So what does it mean? So that means the pattern, the formula, what is the how do you translate?
Yeah, the copy they were following.
So that was different from the system that the people counting verses in that region. So the person who put the number, he puts the number as it is known in the region, in the title. Yeah. And the name also is the same. So the name and the number has nothing to do with the counting in the manuscript because the manuscript maybe has another pattern from another region. It came, they just copied it with exactly the same. Then when you count, you reach to another number, which does not match necessarily with the number in the heading. Yeah. So this information should be studied. And we are at the very beginning. So the first step is just register all of the information in one powerful database. Then when you have enough information into, like what I have shown you today, is only a report of what we have already done. So we have already registered all of the information. I asked the machine, please give me back all of the headings. That's it. So we get back. So the next step is we put more information about the headings. We put the typological information into headings. Next time I ask the machine, okay, give me a report of names which has this kind of structure. Then you get back the information. So we need to register all of the information separately. Then in the future, we can analyze in a very precise way and not just case studies that always done.
No, clear. I mean, it's a condensed approach using large data in a systematic way, to get away from the case studies. True. I see on the screen maybe a last question from Abdul Wahab Kösesoy. I will read it to you. As we know,
that was the question
okay. So this was already given to Enes. So it seems there are no questions, neither here in Berlin, neither out there on the screen. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you to the presenters, and hopefully we meet soon on the screen or here in Berlin with the name of the surah, the name of the rose, or other interesting topics. Thank you very much.